Good morning, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPLA.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. I got to start out by just letting everybody know this new chair that I got is not working so well in regards to my inability to stay still. So I'm hoping to keep myself still over the duration of this show. Ton of stuff we're going to get into, but always a reminder. Anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unified America, you can comment on the Facebook Live feed. You could also comment on Periscope or leave a comment on YouTube. But there's also a number you can call, 732-364-3598. And like I said, anything that is on your mind is going to take precedence over anything that I'm saying here today. If you saw a little caption of the show today, we're going to discuss a number of different topics going on in the world of sports, and I did put out a poll. Got over 100 responses to it. In other words, 100 votes. Obviously, the group of Twitter followers I have are not so much engaged with what it is that I have to say, but I do want to appreciate and say thank you to everybody that did vote on the poll in regards of outside of who I really consider the best three broadcasters by themselves that belong in that Mount Rushmore, who would be the fourth. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, NFL schedule, a little bit about Jackie Robinson Day, a little bit about Jackie Robinson. But what I'm going to start out by talking about today is, I don't know how to describe it, because I think it's I'm not going to say it's a polarizing topic, but it's one that does have a lot of intrigue. And when it goes down to the players in Major League Baseball, players are very, in regards to their opinions about it, they're either okay with the way the game is being played or they have an issue with it. And you see it happening during games live, as we see, whether it was last night, whether it was last week. You got the Derek Dietrich thing where he's standing there literally going out of his way to show up the pitcher. And there's no way to get around that. You stand there and stare at a ball as it goes over the fence for what seemed like 5 minutes. You can't say that you're just, admiring your own work. That's an insult to the pitcher, and Chris Archer in that situation very well should have retaliated like he did. Now you got probably a situation where it's going too far, where players are taking it upon themselves to speak on behalf of the game. And I don't think this is something that is new to the game. It's something that's happened for a while. You could talk about respect as it sits up there in the game of baseball, and respecting Nationals pastime, and how it impacts you, a given event on a certain game. I understand all that. I do. I understand when it comes to players respecting the game, but we have to understand that the game has changed, and whether it's the influx of different type of players from all over the world with different cultures and different interests and different ways that they play the game from when they were a child, and doing certain things that are not insulting then, or not insulting in different countries, but when it comes out here to the game as it's played right now in Major League Baseball, which we still, unfortunately, and I know a lot of people aren't going to like me saying this, it's still a white-controlled sport. And, when a group of white people who are predominantly in that feeling in regards to the way that they're overseeing baseball, there's still many white owners, there's still many white general managers, many white managers, as you've heard me talk about in this game before. There's going to be a lack of an open-mindedness to somebody that is different and has a different culture and has a different bringing up. And that's, to me, one of the underlying problems with the game today, because you're having people that are playing the game that may not be able to relate to the way the game is being played against one another. And that's why you're having some of the problems that we have. Listen, when it comes down to it, showing emotion in baseball, there's nothing wrong with it. Emotion has been shown in baseball for a long time. Bats have been flipped on big home runs all the time. Bats have also been flipped in regards to home runs that don't mean anything. So the question is, how do each individual players take it. And I understand there's going to be some pitchers that aren't going to be happy when a player flips a bat. Pitchers have the control and the ability to handle that situation as they want. So when you see dust-ups, when you see players that get brushed back or hit because they flipped the bat, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with the fact that they flipped the bat, but they have to understand, just as much as the players that I'm talking about need to understand that there's different cultures and different ways that the game is played, that if you flip a bat after hitting a home run, the intention 100% of the time is not to insult the pitcher. As we hit what we'll call the opening point here at a Pass Ball show, like I said, we're going to get into NFL schedule. We're going to talk about Jackie Robinson. We're going to talk a little bit about the best sportscasters in the history of sports. But bat flips, I don't think they're all devious. I don't think they're all done with the intention to show up the pitcher. And I think it does speak to the generation that we live in when we talk about millennials who are very soft, are very quick to get insulted, are very quick to get bothered, ready to speak out saying, hey, why are they doing this against me? And like I said, when it comes down to the pitcher, you give up a big home run and you don't like the way that that batter flipped that bat. First of all, the onus is on you. Maybe you should have made a better pitch. Maybe you should focus on trying to make a better pitch the next time. And the other side of it is, yes, you have the ability to take the game in your own hands if you want to retaliate or if the team wants to retaliate. And obviously there's professional ways to do it and non-professional ways to do it. If you look at Derek Dietrich and Chris Archer the other day, and you can say whatever you want about Chris Archer. I like Chris Archer. I think he's a good pitcher. He's a good emblem and representation of what the game is. He didn't like the fact that Derek Dietrich stood for what seemed like 5 minutes after he hit a long home run. You know, Dietrich, maybe in his defense, will say, hey, I'll never hit a ball like that in my life. I just wanted a chance to admire it. But you have to understand that somebody's going to get pissed off. You have to understand that Chris Archer isn't going to take too kindly to the fact that you're standing there watching the ball for like at least a minute, at least 45 seconds. So Derek Dietrich comes back up to the plate, and it's up to Chris Archer how he wants to handle it. And if Chris Archer wants to buzz him inside or hit him in the back, he's got the right to do that. And the fact that he went low and below the waist and didn't hit Dietrich means that I'm siding 100% with Chris Archer on that particular situation. He was bothered by what Dietrich did, and maybe Dietrich in hindsight can look back at the fact that maybe he shouldn't have done it. Maybe he should not have spoken out as much. And think about it. Like, we're talking about some, language that is not speaking in words or spoken in words. You stand there, and sure, you want to admire it for a second or two, that's fine. You want to flip your bat? I actually have no problem with bat flipping in baseball. And I think that's, from the other side, and I'm going to say I'm siding with Chris Archer when it comes to him buzzing Derek Dietrich inside. Some of the pitchers are getting a little too soft. They don't like the fact that somebody smacks a home run 400-something feet from them in the middle of a game that means nothing. You're talking about yesterday, the Royals and the White Sox are crying out loud. These are two teams that are certainly not playing for the playoffs this year, are rebuilding. Hopefully over the course of the next couple seasons, individually, each one of these teams can get a little bit better. But what are they doing making a big deal over that? Tim Anderson wants to celebrate hitting a home run. What's Brad Keller doing? What is he protecting? And Tim Anderson making it look like he just won the 7th game of the World Series. Relax already. Both of your squads are terrible right now. Just play the game. A little reaction or an overreaction on hitting a home run or flipping a bat or throwing it up in the air should really be relegated to certain times and certain moments. I don't mind if Tim Anderson's home run is a walk-off and he wants to celebrate. That's fine. It's a big home run, especially if you hit it when you're down or you hit it late in the game to tie it. But not in the 5th inning against the Royals. I think there's a balance between celebrating certain things. We can talk about different cultures that do that, that don't do that. But the other side of it is the fact that certain games, yes, they're all important to win, but they shouldn't be celebrated like it's the winning of a championship, like it's that dramatic home run that you hit down 3 with the bases loaded in the bottom of the 9th inning. Those are different things. And I think of Asdrubal Cabrera a couple of years ago when he did that flipping the table thing with his bat flip. You know, that was a big home run. That was a home run down 2 in the bottom of the 11th inning in 2016 in a game that the Mets needed to get in the mix for a wild card race, and they ended up getting in there and getting there. So certain home runs I'm okay with. Jose Bautista hitting that home run against the Rangers. I got no problem with Bautista flipping his bat in that spot. That was a huge home run. But we're talking about the 5th inning of a game between the White Sox and the Royals. Both of these teams know they're going nowhere. It's unfortunate. Listen, you want to play 162 games, see where it gets you. Maybe you win a couple more than you're expected. Maybe you're in some sort of pennant race. That's what all teams are playing for. Even the ones that have the worst expectations. Maybe the teams that didn't go out there and put themselves in the best position to win in 2019. You're just trying to win as many games as possible. But when you got the Royals and the White Sox dusting it up on the field, shaking hands or whatever, hugging each other or yelling or saying mean things to each other, it just shows the level of where you guys are at as franchises. Is that the most important thing? Is it most important for Tim Anderson to show up the Kansas City Royals? Is it the most important thing for Brad Keller to get his retaliation on Tim Anderson? Does that mean more than actually winning the game? Does that mean more than making your team a little bit better? I think some of it has to do with the prioritizing of things. Winning should always be number one. But when you're building a team, certainly building a team down from scratch like the White Sox were and are, and the Royals are right now, you want to have your priorities set on something else. It's one thing if you have the ball buzzed by your head. It's one thing if you have a player that's taken out and injured on the field. Those may be situations which would be reasons to fight. But not arguing over a bat flip on a home run. And certainly from the home run hitter standpoint, know your role and know the timing of the game. When you hit a home run in the middle of nowhere against a team going nowhere, when you're a team going nowhere, hold that celebration for a moment that really matters. This copyright and broadcast is authorized under internet rights granted by the World Wide Web and is solely for entertainment of our audience. Any publication, reproduction, or other use of the pictures, descriptions, and accounts of this show without the express written consent of the Passball Show, JohnPielli.com, and John Pielli, LLC, is prohibited. Any commercial or other use of the program, such as by charge and admission for a showing, is similarly prohibited. So, the NFL released its schedule, and listen, man, one of the things that makes me laugh is the overemphasis that diehard football fans have on every little thing. Now, I understand the NFL draft is a big thing. It's a big deal. You're talking about a series of players that are drafted, particularly in the first 3 rounds or so, that are all going to likely have impacts on NFL teams during the regular season. So if you had a crappy squad or a bad team last year, you can rebuild through the draft. You get a top player. You get a new quarterback. You get a top edge rusher. And all of a sudden, the landscape of your team looks a little bit different. You mix that in with free agency, which obviously is a big thing. And then you start talking about the positivity of each respective team to win a game in a National Football League season. But when it comes to the releasing of the schedule, first thing, which is obvious, we all know this, even your diehardest of diehard NFL fans know this, that the opponents of who each team is going to play is known well before the schedule is released. So this isn't a shock. When Major League Baseball releases its schedule in September for the following year, you got interleague games, you got certain things that aren't known that get released at that time. You're like, all right, well, you know what, this team's going to be over here at this time. You're opening here, you're closing here. I get that as it applies to the NFL schedule, but there's very little you can get out of it because you already know who the opponents are going to be. or what divisions you're going to play, what division in your conference you're going to play, what division in the other conference you're going to play. What are those other mutual 2 games? Obviously, they're based off of the winning record you had last year. If you had a good team, you're probably going to play another good team for those 2 games. If you had a crappy team, you're probably going to play some bad teams in those last 2 games. So try to balance out the schedule and just make competition what it is. But, more emphasis really should be on, let's say, a Josh Rosen, who's out there, and you think about the NFL draft coming up and the Arizona Cardinals, who haven't made a definitive decision, or at least publicly, what they're going to do. Are they going to draft Kyler Murray? Or going to draft one of those edge rushers? A Bosa, Nick Bosa. He certainly could be the number 1 overall pick. It wouldn't be a surprise if he was. What does Arizona want to do? Because Josh Rosen, being a quarterback and being available to be traded for, it is certainly going to impact what a lot of other teams do. There's a handful of teams in the draft. They're thinking about drafting a quarterback. And I wouldn't, maybe, I have certain stock in Murray, or a value of Murray that I don't have. I think he's going to be a good NFL quarterback, but I don't look at him as the next Peyton Manning. I don't look at him as the next Andrew Luck. I look at him as a quarterback that could be decent. Maybe, if things go right, he could be a Darnold type. He could be a Josh Allen type, a Baker Mayfield type, maybe one of those leaders that leads a bad team to prominence down the road. But I'm not ridiculously excited about Kyler Murray, and certainly when it comes to Dwayne Haskins and Locke, and when you go down and down when it comes to the other quarterbacks that are out there, I'm not necessarily thinking about these guys winning my team a Super Bowl or becoming one of the best in the league. Now back to the schedule. Like I said, this is another thing that diehard football fans put way too much stock in. You know who the opponents are going to be. Sure, if that's all you breathe and eat and sleep and drink when it comes to is football, then you're going to be thinking about every different thing that's coming up. The release of the schedule maybe is a certain mark as you're getting closer to the start of the season. You're getting a little bit closer, right? So it's a big moment for you, and I understand for the diest of diehards of why they feel the way that they feel. But it's a little bit overblown. You make it such a big deal about the release of the schedule. Yes, there's 4 games in London, so 8 different teams are going to be playing in London. 3 of the games are going to be at 9:30 in the morning. The Chiefs are playing in Mexico City. NFL is trying to continue to grow the game throughout the world, which I've always said, as popular as the NFL is in this country, in the United States of America, is way down the list when it comes to the world sports. Baseball may have a chance to be up there amongst the best sports in the world. Hockey has a chance to be amongst the best sports in the world. When you think of the NFL and pro football here in the United States, the rest of the world looks at football as soccer. And there's no way that American football is ever going to match up with that of soccer. Sure, you're going to get some people that are intrigued. You may get some fans, but mostly when you're playing games in London and Mexico City, you're getting a bunch of fans of the 2 particular teams that are playing, making a long trip and traveling to go see a game in a different country. It's not like Japan in the opening of the baseball season where 98% of the fans that were in the Tokyo Dome were Japanese residents. You're not seeing the game grow from within the country. Sure, there are people that are around there in that neighborhood, in that city, in that country that are like, hey, I could go watch a pro football game, an American football game, but I bet you most of them come out of it thinking that it's nothing like football as it's played throughout the world in soccer. But the last thing I want to say about the release of the NFL schedule, sure, there's going to be some intriguing matchups. Antonio Brown against the Pittsburgh Steelers, wearing the uniform of the whatever Raiders we want to call them. Are they Oakland? Are they going to be considered Las Vegas? Yeah. Where are they playing this year? Who knows? Who cares? You got the opening game with the Packers and the Bears, which I think is going to be interesting because you're talking about the 100th anniversary of the National Football League. Yeah, it's amazing that, the sport, especially the way it started the first 30, 40 years. And, for those that haven't really done the research or don't care about the history of the National Football League, it was a league that struggled for a long time. The NFL growing into what it is today took a lot of work. I mean, pro football games in the 1920s and 1930s and 1940s took second fiddle to what you saw in college. College football games, especially the Ivy League schools, those games took a lot of precedence over NFL games. NFL players did not get paid a lot of money, and they were set up in a spot where, the games were not being seen by a lot of people. The games were not televised or on the radio. And you look at the development, obviously the 1950s was a big decade for sports. Lenny Moore, his impact on the Baltimore Colts was certainly a factor in there, but you also had some really good teams, some really good players, the Jim Browns, the Otto Grahams, obviously Lombardi, a legendary coach, the best coach of all time. And the game kind of grew in the 50s into the 60s, and obviously you had the advent or the emergence of the AFL, which started in 1960. And that being a competing league that actually made a run towards the NFL, and then the merger, and then the start of the Super Bowl. A lot had to happen for that to get there. So as we look at 100 years celebrating the history of the National Football League, I think there should be a lot more emphasis this year and a lot more discussion being had about how the game got from where it was in 1919 and 1920 to the way it is right now. Because you can talk about baseball being a prominent sport for a lot of different reasons and presiding over a lot of different things that happened over the course of the history of the United States of America. The NFL spent a long time, 30, almost 40 years, taking kind of a back seat to America, but also to the other sports. So hopefully there is some more documentaries and more things put out there to talk about the early emergence of the NFL and some interesting things that happened in the early history of the NFL. That to me would be interesting. And I hope the NFL does more work to kind of relish in its history a little bit, because it hasn't done a very good job of that. Most of the history of the NFL is confined to what we would like to call the Super Bowl era, but without the predecessors and the teams that existed before, and teams like the Packers and the Bears who are playing games in 1920. You don't have anything close to what you have right now. Just a reminder that Castrol provides maximum protection against viscosity and thermal breakdown. This is the Pass Ball Show, brought to you by JohnPLA.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. So staying on a historical sense, of course, we know April 15th every year. Now, Major League Baseball makes sure every one of their players put a number 42 on the back of their jersey in remembrance and respect for Jackie Robinson, the first African-American player in Major League Baseball in 1947. And obviously he was the first African-American baseball player since the days of Moses Fleetwood Walker and William Edward White. We look at, so many different things that were going wrong there. And I don't think, listen, I've stressed, the ignorance that this country has up until this very moment, and ignorance that just goes ridiculous on both sides of the spectrum when it comes to, what used to be right. And to assume because somebody was doing something that wasn't right, that as a culture you can't change. And then the other side of it, of why people would choose to act in certain ways. There's a lot of psychology involved in that. And there's a lot of, analysis that could be done of why people think the way that they do. But the bottom line is that Jackie Robinson, and I'm obviously not saying anything that hasn't been said before, went through stuff that he probably shouldn't have had to do. And in the year of 2019, you can't imagine somebody having to go through all the hatred and deception and the fact that the majority of people don't want to see you succeed just because of the color of your skin. Like I said, it happens now. It still happens way too much. If it happens once, it's too much. But we've come a long way in the last 72 years. Maybe not far enough. Like I said, Major League Baseball's got 11 teams that have never had a black manager. How many African-American general managers have there been in Major League Baseball? How many African-American owners have there been in Major League Baseball? So you still haven't seen things on an equal spectrum for people of all races, creeds, and colors. But, you see a very good amount of Major League Baseball players in the game today, the McCutchens, the Adam Joneses. And, you look at the path that's been paved for everybody to have the opportunity to succeed in baseball. And I spoke about this before, different cultures, whether it's, certain Latin countries that are, learn as a 3 or 4-year-old how to flip a bat, aren't necessarily doing it to show up a pitcher. But it's good to see, an embracing of all different credences and cultures in the game. Because the game is not supposed to be played just one way. A lot of people still have it stuck in their heads to say this is the only way baseball is supposed to be played. And it's not that way. And obviously we know about Jackie Robinson. Ken Burns did a documentary on Jackie Robinson. And he through the people that were doing the research on there, spoke a lot about what it was like for him and Rachel, who, thank God, is still with us, 95, 96 years old. The different trials and tribulations that they had to go to. It was almost like the two of them against everybody, against their own team, against Jackie's own teammates, against opponents, against an entire sport that really outside of Branch Rickey. And like I said, you can even question Branch Rickey's motives in why he wanted an African-American player on his team and wanted to open a door for the best black players to play for the Dodgers. Certainly some of it had to do with a financial aspect of it and a better chance to win. Listen, if I could get the best of the best to want to play for me, if I could get the best players in the Negro Leagues to play on my team and nobody else's, look at that advantage that it's going to give the Brooklyn Dodgers going forward. And, Jackie Robinson, and one of the things that doesn't get spoken about as much, obviously Jackie paved the way for anybody that came after him. But the Dodgers had it set up with the Newcombs and the Campanellas and a series of other black players they had signed up before Jackie made his Major League debut on April 15, 1947. So there was a lot of a lot was invested by Branch Rickey in bringing black players into his team. And certainly, and I'm sure, you talk about the incident that happened when Rickey was a player and he watched as a black player was kind of outlawed from the sport and not allowed to play professionally, and how it stuck in his mind, how he wished that if he was ever in a situation where he could do something about this, he would. So that part of it I believe, and I think it's genuine. Rickey was a Christian man. I think he really did look at all people as being equal. So I think from that standpoint, he was supportive, and I don't think he was BSing anybody when he did what he did. Not, like I said, not only bringing Jackie in, but a lot of the other black players that he ended up signing. The other side of it certainly is true and needs to get spoken about. He was thinking about the competitive advantage. Branch Rickey wants to hold on to his own job, obviously knows he's going to be at risk. If he's got a racist owner, he may not be able to do this. Or if he pushes for Jackie Robinson to be the first African-American baseball player since the day of Moses Fleetwood Walker, he's got a chance that he could lose his job over it if he has a racist owner. So he is taking a little bit of a risk, but with that risk is a huge opportunity and a reward for him. If he brings Jackie Robinson in, he's going to bring in all the African-American fans because they're going to root for Jackie Robinson, which they should. And he's going to bring in other African-American players. They're going to say, hey, you guys opened the door. I'm going to go to the Dodgers instead of any one of these other teams that didn't do it. You guys were the first. And the one thing about the documentary, which I thought was pretty interesting, and this is something that I didn't know, there was actually pressure from New York City Mayor, LaGuardia, who was a hardcore Republican, and believed that all people were created equal, and was wondering why baseball hadn't integrated itself to that point. If the military had integrated itself by that point, why Major League Baseball, which we consider a national pastime, which we consider America, the country as it is, the melting pot, where people for all wakes and shapes of the world, and all wakes and shapes of colors and credences and different nationalities come over here to blend into one. Why is there a restriction, self-imposed, and maybe under the table, maybe a gentleman's agreement that is barring black players from playing Major League Baseball? And LaGuardia was outspoken about it. And he was going to make a big deal to the 3 New York City teams, who of course were the Yankees, the Dodgers and the Giants and make a big deal about why are you guys not integrating? And Branch Rickey kind of sensed what was going to be this pressure and wanted to do it on his own, didn't want to do it because he was pressed into it by a mayor. He ended up kind of beating him to the punch and signs Jackie Robinson, 1947. Of course, on April 15th, he ends up making his major league debut. So he kind of did it a little bit earlier. He did it before there was pressure from the mayor. And, there was different things that were going on there. And obviously, what Jackie Robinson did just by stepping foot on the field and playing baseball with white players, what it did in regards to civil rights, obviously, listen, that can't be spoken about enough. Perhaps without Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson, or Jackie Robinson and Branch Rickey, however you want to look at it, maybe we don't make the strides in civil rights that were made in the 60s and 70s. And certainly the ones that have been made up to this point. And listen, anybody that's listening could attest to the fact that, yes, there are racist people out there. But the strides that we've made in civil rights in this country, where we sit here in the year 2019, are tremendous. And if you don't know that or don't think that, I tell you, do a little more research. Look back at how bad things were in the 1940s and the 1950s and the 1960s. Learn a little bit about Jim Crow. Learn a little bit about segregation. Look at bathrooms that say white bathrooms and colored bathrooms. Can you imagine anybody doing that in this country right now? This is the famous Budweiser beer. We know of no brand produced by any other brewer that costs so much to brew and age. Our exclusive Beechwood aging produces a taste, the smoothness, and drinkability you'll find in no beer at any cost. So last topic we're going to bring up is a little bit in relationship to what I tweeted out. I tweeted out a poll, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why. If we're talking about a Mount Rushmore of sports broadcasters, there's 3 guys that stand out that should be on this list regardless. And, there was a little backlash. Some perhaps by not knowing the impact that each one of these broadcasters have had. But if you're starting a Mount Rushmore when it comes to sportscasters, it has to start with none other than Howard Cosell. Now, Howard Cosell is probably the most polarizing figure when it comes to broadcasters. He is certainly hated, probably by more people than he's liked by. But this was a dude that, in the 1950s, pulled around hundreds of pounds worth of equipment to try to get sound bites and opinions and ask questions to certain players when this wasn't done before. If you're looking at the emergence of radio, the likes of the Red Barbers and the Mel Allens were basically telling you through a device that could be broadcast out to thousands and hundreds of thousands and maybe millions at the time, the details of what was going on in a game where somebody wasn't attending. So that at some point was a big step for sports. You can listen to sports without actually being at the event. Howard Cosell takes it a step further, and instead of just doing commentary on what his opinion over what he saw, went in there to ask some questions, and then over time they became tough questions. And it really set the landscape for sports broadcasting for what it is today. When you got interviews that are being done. And I'm not going to say Howard Cosell was the first to ever record an interview, but he was the first to pursue it as a part of the game and as a part of one of the resources for the audiences. You look at a guy like Al Michaels, and Al Michaels, Bob Costas, who I think both belong on what we call the Mount Rushmore of sports broadcasters, probably didn't care too much for Howard Cosell. But I bet you pin this question on him, they sure as hell respected what he did for the industry. Sure, in the late 70s and the 80s, up until Howard Cosell's last day working for ABC, he was a pretty ornery son of a bitch. And I'm sure a lot of people that had to work with him knew that it was very tough. And he gained a lot of power. This guy was certainly full of himself. And if you want to, set your sights up to think of yourself as being the best of the best, you probably weren't going to think as highly of yourself as Howard Cosell did. And Howard, as time goes by, just doesn't feel like he's getting the respect. I think Howard was very noticeable of the things that he did and his role. And for Monday Night Football with Don Meredith and Frank Gifford, for where that stood in the grand scheme of not just football, but professional sports. To have a game of the week every Monday that was viewed by millions of people, something that you didn't have during the regular season of any sport before. So the success of Monday Night Football really transcended the world of sports. And obviously from what he did as a person that asked questions, the relationships he built up, whether it was Muhammad Ali or other people in the world of sports. This was something that hadn't been done before. And Al Michaels, I think, took pretty much the baton from Cosell, doing the Olympics. Obviously, one of the bigger upsets in sports history. The United States beating the Soviet Union in the semifinals of the Olympics in 1980. Michaels' call. And then you look at a guy like Costas that both did many, many different sports and did it all very well. So what the question, in case you didn't see it on Twitter, which many of you didn't, is if we're making a Mount Rushmore and we're starting it in regards to sports broadcasters with Howard Cosell, with Al Michaels, and with Bob Costas, who is the fourth? And it's hard when you put a name like Vince Scully in there to have anything or anybody that's going to say anything bad about Vince Scully. And if you do, I don't understand it. And think about it. If you go out there and say Vince Scully is anything other than a saint, a legend, one of the best at what he ever did, just an absolute gentleman. If you said anything that wasn't that, think about the vitriol you'd face from social media or just anybody in a general crowd that you spoke that in front of. So I kind of knew how this poll was going to go. You put Vince Scully in the mix, and it's not that Vince Scully just did games for the Brooklyn and Los Angeles Dodgers for, 60-something years. He did other sports. He did national games. He has a legendary voice. And his accomplishments speak for itself. Another guy that, perhaps doesn't get the same type of respect, and it's not a slight against him, is Dick Enberg. Dick Enberg, for his years doing tennis, but doing all four of the major sports, having that prominent voice that just kind of rings in your ear, pretty similar to a Scully. He did it for many, many, many years, and obviously was an absolute legend. He doesn't get the credit, maybe because in some regions, from a national level, probably doesn't get the notoriety that a Scully does, or Scully did. But he's certainly somebody that has to be considered. Marv Albert, I think, is another interesting one. For his days doing football, but also obviously known primarily as an NBA guy. And I thought, a lot of people would think about Marv Albert, and if you were more of a diehard basketball fan than you were any other sport, you'd start to think, hey, Marv Albert, yes, and it's in the hole. Which obviously was a terrible job of trying to imitate him, but you know his catchphrases and what he's about. And then the other one, I felt like I kind of made a mistake because, I think of John Madden, and I think a lot of people think of John Madden now for the football game, for his days as a broadcaster and his days with Pat Summerall. But very few people now will think of John Madden as the coach, the coach that took over the Oakland Raiders in his 30s, led them to Super Bowls. But, John Madden, the former coach, may not be online with Howard Cosell and his views, and views that I agree with, by the way, of the jockocracy that exists in sports. The reward that athletes, and in Madden's case as a coach, get for playing the game. And Cosell's last book, I believe, that he released, which pissed a lot of people off, led to his departure from ABC after so many years. I never played the game, which was a double entendre, kind of meant two different things. I never played the game as a sport, but I also never played the game that exists with all the issues behind the mic and behind the scenes on a broadcast team or working for a network as a sportscaster. So would it be maybe more fitting to put a fourth in there? No disrespect to John Madden. I grew up, like a lot of people did, watching the telecast of Pat Summerall and John Madden. I mean, it's like, gospel speak to me. It's like the voice of God listening or watching one of those games with those two guys doing play-by-play. But should maybe a guy like Dick Stockton, Brent Musburger, I think those are guys that stand out in regards to those that didn't play games professionally but were very good sportscasters. I thought Musburger would be he'd be certainly a great fit to the list. Like I said, Stockton I thought was a legend. You think of a Jack Buck. I mean, maybe people that are more modern that are watching a game now may have grown a little fond of a Joe Buck, perhaps. And listen, there's no issues with Joe Buck. Joe Buck is he's pretty much the national guy. And, when he's broadcasting a game, whether it's the World Series or whether it's an NFL game, he's the one that's thrown in your face. So because he's thrown in your face, he's going to face the most criticism. And I think he's done it with respect and class. And sure, he may be a polarizing figure. You may go on and watch a broadcast with Joe Buck doing the play-by-play, and you're either going to be okay with him or you're going to hate him. I'm on the side that's, okay with him. I got no issue with him. And maybe over time, Joe Buck goes into that same conversation, but he certainly can't shine Bob Costas' shoes or Al Michaels' shoes, let alone Howard Cosell's. And I think what a lot of people may not understand in regards to sports broadcasting is that Cosell, then Costas and Michaels really laid the groundwork for broadcasting as we see it right now. You could throw in a Scully, you could throw in an Enberg, you could throw in a Musburger or a Dick Stockton. And without those guys laying the groundwork for broadcasting as we see right now, you may not have some of those that we enjoy and love and like to listen to. This is the Pass Ball Show brought to you by JohnPielli.com. A little recap of the show today. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in on what we call the 18th day, and I think I screwed it up again on Periscope. I put the 19th. I'm a day ahead. I think I was 3 days ahead when I did my show last week. Whatever. A little recap of the show today. Bat flips. Listen, I think in some cases there's nothing wrong with it, especially if it's for a big moment. I think pitchers are a little bit soft in their overreaction to some things, but there are times to react to something that you see. And a pitcher does have the ability with the ball to control that. Bob Gibson did a great job at it. Don Drysdale did a great job at it. He did something you don't like, you're going to get one not only at you, but at your head. There was a time in baseball when that was okay. I understand why it's not right now. But that pitcher that takes a ball and whizzes it behind somebody's back, especially if it's below the waist and down, I don't have any problem with that. Batters overreacted, pitchers overreacted because they don't like the fact that he gave up a home run. Don't give up the home run next time. Make a better pitch. NFL schedule. Once again, diehard NFL fans are out there going crazy over the schedule. You knew for a while who the opponents were going to be. I see some intrigue in the 100th anniversary game of the NFL with the Packers and the Bears. I like that that's starting the season. You got 4 games in London, another game in Mexico City. Jackie Robinson, Branch Rickey, that relationship we spoke about a little bit on the show today. If you're interested in more, you could always rewind or listen to the show from the beginning. Top sportscasters of all time. Starts with Howard Cosell, Al Michaels, and Bob Costas. And after that, it's probably been Scully, probably Dick Enberg, Brent Musburger, Dick Stockton. You could throw Marv Albert and John Madden in the mix as well. I do want to thank everybody for tuning into the show today. God bless you. Hope everybody has a nice Easter. Good Friday is tomorrow. Hope everybody thinks, especially, if you are into believing in God and believing in Jesus, of the sacrifices that the Lord made for us. Anybody who's been to a Palm Sunday Mass knows the depths and what you go through when you're reciting the Passion and stuff like that. And for those that don't believe, that we're not in a situation where we live in the age of 2019 where it's about recruiting or getting more people to be like us. I do think it's very important to accept and understand the differences that people have in opinion, whether it comes to politics, whether it comes to sports, but also as it applies to religion. A person that may be atheist or a person that may believe in a different type of God is not going to be swayed in the same way that somebody that has a different political opinion isn't going to be swayed in a way that they feel. So I think it's very important in this day and age to be understanding, to be respectful of everybody based off of whatever it is that they believe. And if their beliefs don't coincide with what it is that you believe, it's still okay. Once again, the United States of America, the melting pot. I think of American cheese when I think of America the country, because American cheese, which a lot of people may not know, is a mixture of all different kind of cheeses. We call it American, but it's just a molding of all different kind of cheeses. That's why all American cheeses taste different. America the country is a mixture of the best throughout the world. There's no such thing as American. American is you, American is me. But there's no way that we're supposed to look. There's no way that we're supposed to act. There's no way that we're supposed to, be in regards to religious or not religious. There's no way that we're supposed to be in regards to political or not political. There's no way that we should be in regards to any of our favorite sports teams. And in fact, we have so many different teams in this country that are all regional. We spend more time arguing with each other over sports teams that exist in this country than supporting one team against other countries throughout the world. So I just had to get that off my chest. Happy Easter, everybody. God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.